Hello and welcome to Endor Model Railway. I'm Jonathan. In my previous video I explained about what choices I'd made about track and points. The time had come to start laying track. I wanted to lay the track on cork in order to soften the noise of the trains, so I had a bit of a look on Amazon and came across rolls of 3mm deep cork specifically sized for N-gauge track. They looked like they'd be ideal, so I ordered 2 of them and some Copydex glue. Before sticking anything to the baseboard I had to work out how to draw smooth curves of the same radii as those in my track plan. I wanted to be relatively precise about this because any imperfections could easily result in small sections that were too tight for my more fussy locomotives, and negate the main reason for building Endor. In the end I used a piece of cardboard with 2 holes in it, one with a track pin through and the other with a pencil. I then ran into a bit of an issue laying the cork. The cork width wasn't particularly consistent, and for the most part I couldn't tell if it was centered over my relatively precise lines that I had drawn on the board. It was also a bit difficult to bend around the curves, and I had to cut notches out of it to make it work. In the end I decided to take a best guess and then redraw the curve over the top of the cork using my cardboard compass and a thin permanent marker. For the most part the line was near enough to the middle of the cork, and it didn't look likely that any track would end up overhanging. Knowing that I wouldn't be having any wires underneath the base, I deliberately left some small gaps through the cork to feed wires through later on. The positions of the gaps were a little random. Next up would be actual track laying. I was excited to be cracking on with that, but I had no idea what a battle it would end up being. My previous experience with N-gauge flexitrack had been code 80 track, which feels like it's easy to bend. I think it's because it's actually got a thinner profile throughout its height, whereas the code 55 flexitrack is quite thick at the base part where it's embedded in the sleepers. One piece of flexitrack is a bit less than a metre long, which isn't enough to go all the way around one of the curves. I'd planned to have a short straight at the apex of the 180-degree turn of the track, so that joining 2 lengths of track should be easier. But I had real trouble getting the track to stay in the curve I'd bent it to. At the apex of the curve it kept wanting to spring back out with quite a bit of force. I decided that I wanted all of the track to be glued down rather than pinned, for 2 reasons. I don't like the look of the pins in the sleepers, and I find it almost impossible to nail them in without them bending or shifting position slightly from where I'd intended them to go. To hold the track in place while the glue set, I tried putting temporary track pins in around the outside of the curve. It worked for most of the curve, but the fine N-gauge pins weren't strong enough at the apex. I had to use 00 gauge ones there. But that was only half of the battle. I couldn't for the life of me get the rails to end up near each other at the joins. I could bend the track into place, cut the rail as necessary, but then it'd always need to be some minor readjustment of the curve, which would always result in the rails sliding unevenly. In the end I gave up, let the glue set, and then pushed the rail through the sleepers from the other end. This needed a lot of force, and I was amazed that the glue held the track in place. However, my fingers did slip once or twice, resulting in some injury. The whole process left me extremely frustrated and despairing. After all of that, and removing the temporary track pins, the track started to unstraighten at the apex again. In the end, I had to put the larger track pin back in, where it remains and stands out like a sore thumb. Several weeks went by before I braved the curve at the other end. This time I experimented with making a sort of track jig out of MDF. I bought a jigsaw for this, but turned out to be far too useless at using it. While the curve in the wood looked okay, once I put the track into it, it was clear that it wasn't going to make a smooth curve. I did some searching and found some track clamps, which are specifically for holding flexitrack in place. Again, setting the track in place wasn't easy, but with these clamps it was much better than the track pins approach. Unsurprisingly, the track didn't want to stay in place at the apex. This time I used an offcut from a point motor rod. I'll talk about point motors in another video. It's very strong, is anchored deeper into the board, and isn't as obvious as a track pin. This time around I wasn't expecting to get the rails butting up to each other, and was prepared to slide them along within the sleepers afterwards. I managed to do it without injury too. However, I still find this part of track laying deeply frustrating and haven't been able to get a nice join yet. I'm still thinking about how I might do the outer curves. I'm considering soldering 2 pieces of flexitrack together before laying the curve, and perhaps making a shallow jig of some sort for the straight section at the apex to come part way up the side of the sleepers but be covered by ballast eventually. But before tackling the outer curves I completed the entire inner loop so that I could play trains once again. Laying the straight sections was relatively easy. I learned to cut back the sleepers by about 10mm from the end of each section, so that I could slide track joiners entirely onto one rail to allow it to fall right into place, and then slide the joiner over the joint afterwards. At long last Endor had a working loop of track permanently fixed in place. I'd become quite fed up with laying large curves of flexitrack at this point, so decided that the next step would be to tackle the sidings. I was very conscious that before I could get very far with point work, I'd need a proper plan for how I would switch the polarity of the point frogs, but that's a topic for another video. From watching other YouTube videos of people building N-gauge layouts, I haven't got the impression that laying flexitrack has been a problem for other people, so I'd be interested if anyone has top tips to share. Hopefully, recounting my experience so far doesn't put anyone off. There must be a decent way to do this, and I'm sure I'll get better at it. At the end of the day, I do have a loop of track and I can run trains on it, so it's not so bad. That's all for this one. Bye bye for now.